Well, in case you have missed the last 2 weeks of Sunday services or happened to miss around the weekly text and the newsletters, we are in an exciting new series and an exciting new season as a church. As we've been going through this series called Tent to Temple, we've been looking specifically at the transition that took place in the Old Testament when King David transitioned the people of Israel's worship from the portability of the tent of the tabernacle to the permanent temple, and the implications of how that changed their worship and their relationship with God because of it. And we are navigating a similar transition as a local church plant. For the last 2.5 years, we've been setting up and tearing down in this gorgeous event center in the back half of Pizza Ranch that nobody even knows about, and it has served us so amazingly as we've started up. But there are some drawbacks to just being permanent. One of those being portable. One of those being we're only available from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Sunday mornings. And if you're not driving around or seeing us, you otherwise wouldn't know we are even a thing here, right? And so we're so thrilled to announce that we are partnering with Pizza Ranch in 2 specific ways that makes us permanent moving forward. The first is a deepened relationship with Pizza Ranch, in that we're going to have unlimited access to the Dakota Center here for us to have as many events here as we want without paying additional rent. That's why we were so limited in what all we could host here and had to do all these, we were kind of like a food truck, where we might do something here on Sunday mornings and then we go do something in the library or we'll go do something on campus, And you can only have access to us if we happen to set up shop there. No more. This will be our permanent space for a lot of different events, which is really exciting. But the second and the most exciting part of our announcement is that we are launching the Resilient Community Center. If you haven't been back there yet, we would love to take you back there after service. But if you yank down these banners and you cut through the arcade here and you go down this hallway on the other side of this building, there is about 2,500 square feet of unfinished space that we are partnering with Pizza Ranch to turn into the community center. We'll have a little bit of office space for Mason and I, but the main reason is we're going to have this open concept plan for us to host small groups there, for you to hang out and catch up with your friends, to do graduation parties or baby showers or birthday parties or study nights or game nights or all the things. This is going to be another space in the community, hopefully, for us to cultivate those spiritual friendships, connect with others who believe in Jesus, and to bring people to come to know. This is huge for us, okay? We're going from portable to permanent. And we're on track with a fall rollout just in time for the next semester. So we excited about this? We excited about it? This is setting us up for a huge, huge step forward in what God wants to do here. And we think this is going to unlock a lot of things. But last week, we talked about this crucial question. How are we going to pay for it? Right? And some of you are like, thank goodness I didn't make it to that service, But we had the conversation of how we can support this as a church. And so we gave the invitation, the challenge for us to start giving to Resilient, if you haven't yet, to set up a tithe or 10% of your income, or to at least start with giving something, whether that's a recurring donation or one-time donation. And one of the plethora of cards that are on your chairs is this one. It's called the 4 Vermilion Initiative. We're not doing this for us. We're doing this for Vermilion, right? As this is the last year where a lot of our church plant startup grants are running out, it's now on us for us to financially sustain our own ministry, especially as we're launching this community center. So you can learn more about it here. You can scan the QR code to set up giving right there. And then the other challenge we issued is this other card called the Resilient Partners Program. Because we are kind of a hybrid of a local church and a college ministry, the Partners Program allows for those outside of Resilient to be able to give and support the college aspect of it or the college side of it. So whether that's family members who you think would love to be able to give towards this, or if you're graduating, you want to still kind of turn back and support us in that way, that's kind of what the Partners Program is for. So that was the challenge that we issued last week for us to sustain this, and it's going to be amazing, which is why we're giving out t-shirts for us to say thank you, thank you, thank you for trusting God in this way and helping us. But we're not done yet. Because as we're making this really exciting update to our facilities and the next phase of our resilient ministry, we're stoked about that, as we should be. But what we're talking about today is something really, really near and dear to my heart. And we cannot miss this. And it pretty much is summed up in this one sentence. Ready? Just because our place of worship might be permanent doesn't guarantee our hearts will be. Just because our place of worship might be permanent doesn't guarantee our hearts will be. Or even just the fact you own anything doesn't mean you will be good stewards of it. Just because you sign a marriage license does not mean you will be a good spouse. Just because you sign your name on a mortgage does not mean you will be a good steward of your household. Just because you signed the contract for you to get a new job does not mean you will be a good worker, right? And just because we're having a place of worship does not guarantee we will be avid followers of Jesus as a church family forever. We can't get lost in that. Because that was a mistake that the Israelites made even when they were trying to go from the portability of the tent of the tabernacle to the permanence of the temple. So, we're going to be jumping around a lot in the book of 2 Chronicles today. So go ahead and turn to 2 Chronicles if you have a Bible. We're going to start I'm going to eventually read in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, and then we'll jump over to 7. But let me kind of just give you the grand summary of everything at the end of 1 Chronicles into the beginning of this next book. So in 1 Chronicles 29, we see King David officially declare to the assembly of leaders over Israel that his son Solomon is the one who will build this temple, and for all of them to give out of their personal possessions towards the building of this temple. And it was a glorious day. There was so much celebration about this transition, and they were excited about giving to this project. That's what we talked about last week. But then shortly after this event, David passes away, and Solomon becomes king. And so then we turn the page and we're on 2 Chronicles now. So that's how the book of 2 Chronicles starts. Solomon begins his reign by asking God for wisdom, preparing to build the temple that his father had been working so hard to prepare for. Then in 2 Chronicles 3 and 4, the building project commences, and it details everything that went into it, like the dimensions of the rooms and the construction of all the furnishings, and it all ends with the Israelites bringing the Ark of the Covenant, which resembled God's presence among his people, into the temple in chapter 5. And just as you should whenever you finish any project, they threw a party. So 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 13 through 14 says this, that the trumpeters and singers performed together in unison to praise and give thanks to the Lord. They had a worship band. Accompanied by trumpets, cymbals, and other instruments, they raised their voices and praised the Lord with these words, "He is good. His faithful love endures forever." And at that moment, a thick cloud filled the temple of the Lord. The priests could not continue their service because of the cloud, but the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple of God. Wow. And then in chapter 6, you see Solomon praise God for fulfilling his promise, for bringing this project to fruition, honoring his father's wishes for the space, fulfilling his presence in the temple. And he goes on to pray this amazing prayer of dedication to the temple, that God's Spirit will dwell in this space, but also that if the people of God ever turned away, that they would repent and that they would come back to him and that the temple would be used for God's purposes. Very, very good. So this new permanent place of worship, it starts with a bang. They're excited. They're devoted. But then God shows up to Solomon in a dream to give him his 2 cents. So let's read 2 Chronicles chapter 7 to hear the words that God has to say in response to Solomon, beginning in verse 11. So Solomon finished the temple of the Lord, as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do in the construction of the temple and the palace. Then one night the Lord appeared to Solomon and said, "I have heard your prayer and have chosen the temple as the place for making sacrifices." Jump down to verse 16. "For I have chosen this temple and set it apart to be holy, a place where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. As for you, if you faithfully follow me as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty. For I made this covenant with your father David when I said, one of your descendants will always rule over Israel. But," it's a big but "if you or your descendants abandon me and disobey the decrees and commands I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot the people from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make it an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by will be appalled. They will ask, why did the Lord do such terrible things to this land and to this temple? And the answer will be, because his people abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors who brought them out of Egypt. And they worshiped other gods instead and bowed down to them. That is why he has brought disaster on them. What a somber warning, right? And you'd think God would be a little bit more excited about this, right? And I bet Solomon may have wondered how their people could possibly go wrong. This is an exciting new thing as the people of God, right? We are locked in. Especially because the physical permanence of the temple represented their permanent dedication to the Lord. They're not going anywhere. But as I said, just because your place of worship is permanent does not mean your hearts will be. And that was the case with the people of God, because it wasn't too long that Israel went from dedicating the temple to desecrating the temple. Solomon himself eventually becomes cocky from all the riches and the fame that he gained as king, and he threw himself into worshiping these idols and these false gods, having sex with hundreds of women, and even enslaving his own people to build more majestic structures for his kingdom. And then when Solomon's son, Rehoboam, took the reign as king, he enforced even worse slave labor on the people, so much so that it drove a divide in the country, and this guy named Jeroboam revolted and actually split the kingdom in two, to where they then had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And God consistently sent these guys called prophets to speak to his people to try to get them to turn from these evil, sinful ways. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea and Elijah and so many others. But time and time again, the people of God rejected the prophets, they mocked them, and even killed them, and ignored all the warnings that God constantly gave his people if they did not turn from their sin. So that's the story of God's people, especially as they had all these kings over them. And it all comes to a head in 2 Chronicles, the last chapter of 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. If you want to flip all the way over there and read with me, as it zooms in on the last king of Judah. It was beginning verse 11. That Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. But Zedekiah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, his God, and he refused to humble himself when the prophet Jeremiah spoke to him directly from the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, even though he had taken an oath of loyalty in God's name. And Zedekiah was a hard and stubborn man, refusing to turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Likewise, all the leaders of the priests and the people became more and more unfaithful. They followed all the pagan practices of the surrounding nations, desecrating the temple of the Lord that had been consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, repeatedly sent his prophets to warn them, for he had compassion on his people and his temple. But the people mocked these messengers of God and despised their words. They scoffed at the prophets until the Lord's anger could no longer be restrained and nothing could be done. So the Lord brought the king of Babylon against them. The Babylonians killed Judah's young men, even after chasing them into the temple. They had no pity on the people, killing both young men and young women, the old and the infirm. God handed all of them over to Nebuchadnezzar. The king took home to Babylon all the articles, large and small, used in the temple of God, and the treasures from both the Lord's temple and from the palace of the king and his officials. Then his army burned the temple of God, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, burned all the palaces, and completely destroyed everything of value. The few who survived were taken as exiles to Babylon, and they became servants to the king and his sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. Just because your place of worship is permanent does not mean your hearts will be. The temple was amazing, and it did a lot in those early days of it, to try to cultivate a more dedicated followership to God. But the people's hearts moved. The temple stayed. The people's hearts moved. What's crazy, as you continue to read the story, eventually the Persian Empire comes in, conquers the Babylonian Empire, and says, hey, Jews, you're free to go back to your homeland. They send them back, frees them from exile, which is awesome, and they actually are given the materials to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. New start. Okay, they got a clean slate. But then you have this other prophet named Malachi, and there's several others who, despite them coming back, he calls them out for offering scrappy sacrifices in the new temple again. Then you flash forward hundreds of years to Jesus, and what does he do? He flips tables of all the money changers in the temple who are selling sacrificing animals at exorbitant prices. It was constantly God's people always desecrating the temple no matter what. Their hearts moved. And this continues to be a trend even 2,000 years later with God's people and his church. This new space and new phase of Resilient is incredibly exciting, but remember what I said last week. This facility is a tool, okay? It can either bring amazing opportunities for God to do amazing work in us and in our city and through us, but the space isn't going to do that in itself. It's up to us as his people, and it's up to the Spirit of God to use us to use this place. You see the difference? We got to get this locked in because here's just kind of how the life cycle of a lot of churches work, okay? They all start off as a church plant, just like we were in those early days. It's just a small group of 12 in the library. And then they grow, and they grow, and they grow because they're living out God's purposes for them. Their hearts are aligned with his desires. They're locked in. They're camped out of the grace of God. They're not going anywhere. They're reaching their communities. They're bringing people here. People are being saved, putting their faith in Jesus for the first time, seeing dozens of baptisms, and it is electric. Kind of like Resilient on Sunday mornings, right? Which is awesome. But then these churches continue to grow and grow and grow to the point where they're bursting at the capacity of the room. And people are giving and giving and giving to expand their ministry to maybe new buildings and to get new equipment and just to do something like this with our facilities. And it's awesome, right? They eventually start growing and it's great. And then decades pass. And the drive to take risks and to rely on God to reach the lost in our city starts to fade. And churches become more comfortable, because if you're not taking risks for God, then that means you're getting comfortable in your faith. And if you're getting comfortable in your faith, then that means you're just going through the motions. Then you lose your drive. Then you lose culture. And the energy that was once here because of the crazy awesome stuff God's doing is more of just you attend because that's just what you've always done. And you give not to support the ministry of reaching new people outside these doors, but it's more just to keep the lights on. And it stagnates, even to the point where if a new guest walks through the doors, the church would have no idea what to do with them because they haven't seen a new person come in decades. And then the church slowly dies out as their congregation does. That's morbid, but that's the life cycle of churches. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is if sin steeps into the church to where affairs happen, money is mishandled, church leadership is dishonest, and all sorts of debauchery is allowed to get into this place until just someday it just seems like it implodes out of nowhere, but really it had been lasting for a long time. And guess what? The church never moved. The heart of the church moved. The heart of the church moved. It wasn't the church building that moved, but the church's heart that moved. And the only heart that was truly permanent to God's will and way of doing things was Jesus Christ himself, right? The only person to live a dedicated life to God was Jesus. All of our hearts, though, are portable. We are prone to wander to and fro. Some of us might wander to God, which is great, but others of us, maybe you even know people, wander from God. Maybe that was you at one point. Back and forth, and it is so easy if we as a church don't stay focused on the people outside of these walls, we will turn inward, we will lose culture, we will lose drive, we will not grow, we will not sustain this thing. Or if we do, it's just for our purposes and not for those outside of these walls of this church. See? Here's the truth. The building of a church is only as great as the people who gather in it. It's only the people here that God is using to form that culture that makes these spaces even significant. You see, in the story of the temple, it's a great illustration for the transition that often happens for church bodies, when you go from portable to permanent. But at the same time, the church of God is not the same as the temple of God, okay? The church of God is not the same as the temple of God because the church is not a building and it is not an event you attend. It is a people. It is a people. And it just so happens that we as the people is the temple where God resides. And we just happen to gather at a pizza ranch, which is still pretty cool, right? My shirt even says, I worship Jesus at a pizza ranch. I sport it with pride. 1 Corinthians 3 says this, don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you? God will destroy anyone who destroys this temple, i.e. this body of people, for God's temple is holy and you are that temple. Or 1 Peter 2 says, and you are living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple. What's more, you are his holy priests. Through the mediation of Jesus Christ, you offer spiritual sacrifices that please God. So when Jesus died on that cross, he didn't just save us for eternity. He saved us from needing to offer sacrifices for our sin because he took that punishment, but he also undid us having to gather at the temple. And now we can worship anywhere because it's us who gather in the name of Jesus who forms the spiritual temple of God, which is awesome. So the space doesn't matter. What matters is that we use the space to reach more people for his name and his mission, okay? When Jesus was about to ascend into heaven, he gave his disciples this charge, and in turn, he gives us this exact same charge to go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, to teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. It's our responsibility to make disciples. Our space will help with that, but our space doesn't have flesh and blood. It's not alive. It's not going to make disciples on its own. It's up to you and you and you and you and us to live out God's purposes, for us to remain fixed on his mission. How are we going to live on mission with this? How are we going to be bold in our faith? How are we going to share the gospel with our friends? How are we going to become even more outward focused? If we're getting this space, we're going to have all this stuff. How are we going to steward it to make sure more people are coming here to see Jesus, not just that this is another resilient party? Right? That is the ultimate challenge here. Because I believe that's how we're going to see revival and awakening happen in the city. And I said this a couple weeks ago when we had the grand reveal. It's up to us to actually get serious about this and bring those in. City transformation occurs when God's people who gather in here are radically focused on those out there. Let me say that again. City transformation occurs when God's people who gather in here are radically focused on those out there. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? Man, as I said, the future of Resilient Church is going to open up a number of doors and possibilities because of this space. But here are some of the ideas we're dreaming about for us to be even more outward focused. One of the things that we're going to do this summer is we're going to just have various summer outreach events just to try to reach out to more families. Like we're talking about like doing some fun summer movie matinees or something like that. Because we especially want to see family members and community members of Vermilion start coming here. So that's a fun thing we're doing. We're dreaming about maybe like a monthly outreach event where people can actually come and bring their kids here, and we can provide pizza and arcade games and crafts and stuff so that families, especially families of special needs kids or foster families, can have a place where we can love on them and care for them. And anybody in the community who maybe just needs a night out. We're dreaming about how can we do that. As we've already said, Mason's launching a weekly college ministry, which is just going to be an extra opportunity for you to bring your friends to something on a Sunday night that's going to just help you all grow in discipleship in your own season of life, which we're excited about. Here's one that I was just talking about with Ann the other day. She was around here somewhere. She in the back. Yes, I am stoked for us to host some amazing tailgate parties in this space, right? Just imagine during D-Days, you can just bring your friends over to that space. We can stream the game. You can have Pizza Ranch right there because, grilling out for D-Day's games. Just get some Pizza Ranch pizza, Come on. But just for us to have a space where you can gather and build those friendships like this is just the beginning of things that we want to do. But if we steward this space well, we're going to grow. And so we're already talking about and dreaming about what kind of infrastructure do we need to go to 2 services in the future. Can't put a timeline on that, but we want to see that so that we can have an extra opportunity for people to come and hear the good news of Jesus and have their lives formed vibrantly. This is the future, but it is on you to determine the pace. It's not my job or Mason's job or our leadership's team job. We're just simply discerning where God wants us to go as a church body. We hear the direction, set the compass, but it's every single one of you who determine the pace for how we're going to do that. Which gets me excited for what God's going to do in every single one of you and every single one of us. So here's ultimately the 3 things that we need to do. If we want to see God steward this space, and if we want to see the Spirit of God do a huge thing in us and through us to reach our city, here are 3 things we need to do to see that happen. And the first, we talked about this last week, we need to give. We need to give. God's method of funding his movement is for his people to provide for the ministry of the church. That has been the case for thousands of years, even since the temple of God. So your giving enables us to do these things and to partner with us, especially as we journey into this next season of becoming fully self-sustaining as a church. And we're going to unravel more and more updates about that, of specifically our financial plans, so stay tuned for that. But that's why one of our challenges is just to try to give a recurring donation or to set up a one-time gift or just to test God with this and to see how that happens. We all can contribute in various ways despite where we all might be at in our seasons of life. So that's the first thing. We need to give. But then second is we need to get involved. So we need to invest financially, but we also need to get involved with our time. We need volunteers to help this happen. In fact, Grace is going to be our facilities director. Didn't mean to call you out, Grace. But we're specifically recruiting a team of people who want to just camp out in the community center and be our front desk workers and help provide the space so that when I can go home to be with my family, we can keep it open in the evenings. We need people to volunteer for that. Because I don't got the time to do that, but maybe you do. But if we want to continue to grow as a church, we need people to serve in kids ministry. We need people to serve on tech. If you got musical abilities, Mason would love to have you serve for worship team, guest services, Zeke, I'm looking at you. I know you got a pretty voice. He doesn't have a pretty voice. As far as I know. I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe it's just a big secret. It's so funny. I didn't have that in my notes. We made eye contact. Don't make eye contact with me when I preach. You never know. Everyone's just going to look down. That'll be very hard, right? We need people to get involved and to serve in all these various ways. And so so you have the cards, obviously, if you want to set up a gift. But if you're interested in getting involved, that starts now, especially if we launch the 2 services someday. We need to have that infrastructure of volunteers. Just get involved on the back of your Connect card, and we can get more information to you about our teams. Right? So those are the first things to do. We need to invest financially. We need to give. We need to get involved. Before I go to the third thing, let me just add a couple of notes on these first 2, okay? We have students in the room, and we have what I love to call seasoned adults in the room. You're not older adults. You're just seasoned. You just got experience. You pick your seasoning of choice, whether you're Lowry salt or cookies, salt or whatever, lemon rub. I don't know. Stay focused, Jake. Come on. Stay focused. Everything bagel seasoning, that's my favorite. Anyway, all of us are called to give, and all of us are called to get involved. But because of our various seasons of life, that will look differently for all of us, okay? So students, I know We all know you don't have an abundance of money, if any at all. But even a small gift that you can make each month to support this is still good. Don't shy away from that. God still wants you to steward what little you have. I started my tithing journey by giving $50 a month, because that's literally all I made was $500 a month. I could barely buy groceries for a month these days. Granted, that was 10 years ago. But that's where I started, right? However, what you do have an abundance of is time. You might think you don't, but all the seasoned adults in the room say, you have an abundance of time. It's just a matter of if you have control over your time. You have way more control over your time than many others do. So you can get involved at higher capacities. You could hop on this facilities team. You could help on and help Mason with the college ministry. You can help serve with our monthly outreach to families and hop in kids at a capacity that a lot of adults in the room couldn't. So maybe even if you think financially you can't give a lot, but you have a lot more time, that's an amazing way to serve with what you have there. Now, seasoned adults in the room, my everything bagel seasoning people. I know you don't have an abundance of time. We have work and kids and extracurricular activities and side hustles and so many more things. We are a lot more construed on time, but you are still called to serve in some way. Maybe that's once every 3 weeks on a guest services team or a kids team, or maybe you're able to offer a few hours on a Monday afternoon when we launch a space or something like that. Even if you don't feel like you have an abundance of time, give what you can. But maybe you don't think you have an abundance of money, but all of our students think you do, Could you give more based out of the income that you do have, right? At the very least, we're all hard pinched for cash these days. But you may be able to be a little more generous on the financial side than where our students are, right? So regardless of where we're at seasonally, we are all called to give, we're all called to get involved, but that's going to look different for all of us. The main point is, can we be generous in what God has given us, in our time and our money? But lastly, perhaps the most important thing for us to do is to invite our friends. It's to invite our friends. I know. Who would have guessed? What good is this if we're not seeing new people come and put their faith in Jesus, Have these conversations with your friends. Have these conversations with new people you meet. Bring them here. We want to see them here. The only way how we're going to grow and steward this space well is if we bring our friends here so that they can hear and be a part of this new movement that God's starting. We got to dive into that. We got to do it. Whether it's your coworker or a family member or significant other or a roommate or some random person you met off the street, can we invite them into what God's doing here? So those are our 3 things. And if you have any questions about that, I'd love to talk with you about what further involvement with this place looks like. If we want to grow and steward this opportunity for us to try to be as permanently focused on God, we gotta get focused and involved. We got to give. We've got to invite our friends. I'd love to strategize with what that might look like for you. So if you do have questions, please feel free, put them on your Connect card, and process that.